In the year 1003, in the heart of a kingdom torn by conflict, a boy was born. He was the son of a king and a queen, but his childhood was not one of privilege. His father, King Ethelred the Unready, was a weak monarch, and his mother, Emma of Normandy, would prove to be a woman of great political cunning. This boy, Edward, would be a quiet observer of the great Viking invasions that were tearing his country apart. When the Danish king Sweyn Forkbeard conquered England, the young Edward and his family were forced to flee. They found refuge in Normandy at the court of his mother's family. He spent a quarter of a century there, living as an exile in a foreign land. He learned to speak French, adopted Norman customs, and developed a profound piety. This was not a man forged by war, but by loss and by faith. After the Danish conquest, England went through a tumultuous period, with Ethelred the Unready and his son Edmund briefly regaining the English throne for the House of Wessex, and then Knut and his sons Harold and Harthacnut taking back the crown to Denmark. Edward returned to England in 1041, and a year later, at the age of 40, he was crowned king. He was a man of contrasts, pious and gentle, yet surrounded by ambitious and powerful men. He was a king with a Norman heart, ruling over an Anglo-Saxon kingdom. This duality would be the great conflict of his reign. He was a man who preferred prayer to politics. He spent his life building a church, a magnificent abbey on the banks of the Thames, in a place he called Westminster. It was a grand undertaking, a physical manifestation of his deep devotion. This was to be the site of his final resting place, a holy monument that would one day become the coronation church for all future English monarchs. But, while he built for God, his nobles vied for power. The greatest of those was Godwin, Earl of Wessex, a man of immense wealth and influence. He was a kingmaker who had helped Edward to the throne, and he would not let the king forget it. Edward was caught in the middle of a struggle between the great Anglo-Saxon houses and the Norman advisors he brought over from France. This was the era of the great magnates, and the king's power was often checked by their influence. Edward was married to Godwin's daughter Edith, but their marriage was childless. This fact would have profound and devastating consequences for England. With no direct heir, the succession was in question, a storm that was slowly gathering on the horizon. The great earls, with their own ambitious sons, saw their chance, and across the Channel, in Normandy, his cousin William, the man who would one day be known as a conqueror, watched and waited, believing that a promise had been made. Despite the political turmoil, Edward's reign was a time of relative peace and prosperity. He was a man who favoured justice over violence. He abolished the tax known as the Danegeld, and was a patron of the poor and the weak. He was loved by his people, who saw him as a gentle and holy man. For this, and for his devout piety, he would later be canonized as a saint. In the final year of his life, his political dilemmas reached their peak. With his health failing, he gathered his powerful earls around him. The matter of the succession hung heavy in the air. Harold Godwinson, son of the late Earl Godwin, was one of these men. He was a powerful and ambitious warrior. a man who had already proven himself in battle. As the king lay on his deathbed, a vision came to him. He spoke of the coming doom, of a terrible fate awaiting England. On the 5th of January 1066, a date that would live in infamy, King Edward the Confessor died. He had reigned for 24 years, a time of peace that was now about to be shattered. His death was the spark that ignited the fires of conquest. He was buried in his magnificent Westminster Abbey, a final act of devotion. With his passing, the stage was set for the last great act of the Anglo-Saxon drama. The very next day, Harold Godwinson was crowned king. But across the sea, in Normandy, the heir who had been waiting for decades saw his chance. Edward the Confessor's final unintended legacy was to set in motion the events that would bring an end to an era. The saintly king's death was the moment that truly began the story of William the Conqueror. The peace he had so diligently protected was about to be broken forever.